Thank you very much. About the biggest contributor is an interesting one. So it's my pleasure to be here this morning to take you through the status of HPV vaccine implementation in the region, in the African region. And again, thanks to the organizers of this meeting, we did co-organize with the Sheikh to have everyone here, and we are glad to see that everybody is here. So as my slides come up, I had the last speaker being praised for keeping time, just in trying to keep with my time, within my time. In the opening remarks, we had that there was this WHO call, the global call for the global sorry, if I keep saying COVID-19, do forgive me. Cervical cancer elimination strategy. In 2018, the WHO Director General put out a call for action to eliminate cervical cancer. And in 2020, the World Health Assembly did adopt this elimination strategy as a global strategy with a vision of a world where cervical cancer is eliminated as a public health problem. And this strategy defined elimination as all countries reaching less than 4 cases per 100,000 women years. So that is what we are all driving towards right now. So let us see where we are as a region and where we've come from. Thank you. So this is the strategy I was talking about that did set 3 targets by 2030. There were several consultations that were made even in our region at global level, in all different regions that came up with these targets, and we thought we could hit them. So the first target is to have 90% of all girls fully vaccinated with HPV vaccine by the age of 15. This is a strategy we set for ourselves for 2030. And this is an elimination strategy and not an eradication strategy. I hope we do understand. And as I mentioned, the elimination is defined as less than 4 cases per 100,000 women years. So the rest will be talked about by others, but the primary level of the comprehensive strategy based on vaccination as the primary prevention strategy for this elimination, and then with a secondary prevention strategy through cervical cancer screening at 70%, and then 90% of all women who have been diagnosed with cervical cancer to receive treatment. So we have a 90-70-90 strategy, not the 90-90-90 like HIV. And these are 2030 goals. So today we'll really focus on the HPV vaccination strategy. So when it comes to HPV vaccination, we started in our region. The first time we had the HPV vaccine step in Africa was in 2008 in Uganda under a demonstration program led by PATH. And there were 4 countries globally that started the demonstration program, which was Uganda, Vietnam, Peru, and India in 2008 to learn by doing. This was the first time we were rolling out a vaccine among adolescents. So we wanted to understand what is the best way and best strategy, delivery strategy in reaching these girls. In 2011, the Gavi board approved, it made a decision to fund HPV vaccination demonstration programs in multiple countries. And in 2013, Kenya was the first country to benefit from the demonstration program by Gavi, funded by Gavi. However, in 2011, Rwanda was the first country on our continent to introduce HPV vaccine nationally through a sponsorship of vaccines from the MSD. But in 2015, we had the first national introductions from transitions from demonstration to national in Uganda and Rwanda, and we saw the demand for the HPV vaccine and national introductions actually increasing over time. And we had because by now Gavi was now funding HPV national introductions, the highest demand was seen between 2018 and 2019. not highest demand. The demand kept increasing for national introductions, but we saw the highest number of introductions in 2018 and 2019. And then at that point, we suffered a global, what's the word? We had, what did we have with COVID? A supply constraint. We had a global supply constraint where the demand far exceeded the supply, which is when GSK more or less went out of manufacturing of the vaccine, and we were fully reliant on the Merck for the vaccine. In 2015, 2016, Gavi approved to fund a multiple age cohort, to fund countries to introduce using multiple age cohorts, and countries that had introduced before to also do multi-age cohorts. However, we still had the global supply constraint and we had issues. So we saw from 2020, 2021, we've seen the least number of introductions. Again, one was the global constraints. However, we now have more than enough vaccines, just like we have for COVID, for introduction. So there should be nobody saying they cannot introduce the vaccine. We had, of course, the global shortage, but then in 2020, 2021, we know the biggest issue has been the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, recommendation was made globally to deprioritize the non-outbreak prone diseases, vaccine preventable diseases, to ensure that we did not really run into outbreaks as we for the pandemic. So HPV vaccine was the first vaccine to be deprioritized during the pandemic. And we focused on the outbreak-prone diseases. Again, during COVID, we had the school closures, which are majorly the main strategy for vaccination. So that was another point that affected our coverage. And again, even when we started recovering our routine immunization programs, COVID-19 vaccination in 2021 and even 2022 has taken center stage. So this is a map to show you globally where we lie when it comes to HPV vaccine introduction. And you can see where Africa is. The green is how many countries have introduced the HPV vaccine nationally. And in Africa now we have 24 countries. And glad to say that the 23 of the 24 are in the WHO African region, lying in sub-Saharan Africa, with the 24th country being Libya in North Africa. Again, we still have less than 50 countries, 50% of the African countries having introduced HPV vaccine. So this is just to show you that the HPV vaccine has been rapidly, the introduction in Gavi eligible countries, and we still have low, the middle-income countries having a low introduction rates. Of course, we know because of they have to buy their own vaccine. There was a meeting with the manufacturers in 2018 to discuss and negotiate prices for these countries and find a mechanism in which we could have pooled procurement that gets these countries to access lower prices. As we get this vaccine for $4.5 per dose through Gavi, the middle-income countries are actually, some of the countries were buying it for $100 per dose. And we are talking of African countries. So because it was a negotiation between the country and the manufacturer, but now we are at a mechanism where we would like to do this negotiation through Gavi and UNICEF, even when the countries are not Gavi eligible. So this is a graph to show us the trend of in population coverage, adjusted coverage in the African region. So right now we're at a coverage of 26% for HPV-1 first dose and 22% for the second dose. Again, we are very, very low. If you remember, the target for 2030 is 90% of girls having been fully vaccinated by the age of 15 by 2030. And this is where we are. This is population adjusted for the population of Africa, means given the countries that have introduced by now. On the right-hand side, we have a table that shows the impact of the pandemic on the coverages in various countries. In green, we have countries that have had a mild or no impact. And then in orange, we have the countries that have a moderate impact. And then in red, countries that have really been thoroughly impacted by the pandemic, and in blue, countries that recently introduced. In green, I like teasing my friends from Kenya, much as they're in the green part, it is not all roses. Sorry. Apologies, I don't know what's happening. Okay, so these graphs are showing us again where we were in the impact of the pandemic. In 2019, the African region, as you can see, we were actually one of the highest in this vaccination coverage. For countries that had introduced, on average in Africa, we were at 62% coverage. And in the blue bars are 2019, and the orange bars are 2020, and the gray bars are 2021. So we have jumped from 62% pre-pandemic to 39% coverage right now in the region for countries that have, on average, that have introduced the vaccine. This is a very, very big drop. When you compare with the Euro region, who were at 60% during the pandemic, before the pandemic, and still at 60% now in 2021, well, this is the unique data, the WHO UNICEF estimates. In 2021, you see that they have shown resilience of their programs, probably because of the strategies they are using even through the pandemic. And even you see the difference, the two graphs at the bottom, the high income countries versus the low and middle income countries. The high income countries still have quickly recovered from the pandemic and still maintained high levels of coverage, unlike the low and middle income countries. So this is a very busy slide, but it shows us I mentioned that Gavi in 2016, the Gavi board approved the multi-age to fund the multi-age cohorts, and many countries have been encouraged to conduct the multi-age cohorts catch-ups. However, we were having issues with the vaccine shortages. But now we've had 5 countries, again, if you look at these countries, apart from Zimbabwe, these are countries that really have small populations. And these are the Gambia, which introduced with the multi-age cohorts. Cabo Verde introduced this year. It's the 2022 baby with Lesotho that have introduced HPV vaccine through a multi-age cohort with a single dose. The first country that we have in Africa that has introduced through single dose. And Sao Tome and Principe. Rwanda has also caught up with the multi-age cohort. Zimbabwe introduced in 2018 through a multi-age cohort. Again, Zimbabwe introduced because through a multi-age cohort, they used the GSK vaccine, which the manufacturer did accept actually to only do for Zimbabwe. And Nepal and Togo, which is yet to introduce at the time because they showed interest in the vaccine at the start. Lesotho and Cabo Verde, as I've mentioned, have introduced this year, and we are glad Lesotho did introduce the vaccine earlier nationally. Something went wrong and they have reintroduced the vaccine. And then Sierra Leone and Eritrea are projected to introduce this year. We expect Sierra Leone to introduce in the next 2 weeks, actually the first week of October. And then in 2023, Nigeria, Mali, and Togo are expected to introduce. They have already had their Gavi applications. Togo has their approval already. Mali and Nigeria are undergoing review, and we expect Nigeria has shown interest to introduce through a single dose. In conclusion, we still have our targets to vaccinate 90% of the girls be fully vaccinated by the age of 15 by 2030. We are towards the end of 2020 right now at 22% of girls fully vaccinated. 23 African countries, as I've mentioned, have introduced 23+1, Africa, which is Libya. The coverage is on a downward trend, while in the low and middle income countries, while high income countries actually have shown resilience through the pandemic, but we do believe that after such meetings, we shall see a difference. Indeed, we do need urgent action to improve the coverage, not only to improve the coverage, but also to have other countries introduce the vaccine and then catch up the missed girls, the cohorts that were missed during the pandemic. The dropout rates are still very high. Most countries will show it as rosy, but the dropout rates between the first and second doses are quite high. Maybe that will drive us into the single dose discussions and the data that we have for now. And then we still have seen the pandemic impact. However, we had the WHO Director General last week mention that we have seen the beginning of the end of the pandemic in sight. Right now, nobody should use the pandemic as an excuse not to vaccinate girls or to do the routine immunization catch-ups. We no longer have stockouts. We have enough vaccines. We have another manufacturer that has come into the scene, approved by Gavi and UNICEF, pre-qualified by WHO. We have enough doses for now. Again, there's now, I'm sure one of the reasons we're having this meeting, most of you here have come from Kigali, where we had another HPV meeting. There's increased interest in the revitalization of HPV vaccine. The Gavi 5.0, the donors, the MGF, the Canadian government, we have the Team Europe, have all put money on the table to revitalize HPV programs. Thank you very much.